Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are new here and you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, you can head over to officehours.global. And our first hour, we answer your questions around media, virtual events. And our second hour is something that we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we'll be brainstorming. We want to hear from you about all things marketing, business, technology. So producers, go ahead and put your questions and your comments in early so that our panelists can get to it. And Bill, it is the first Monday of the year. So happy to be with you. Let's get this party started.
Happy day after New Year, Liberty. It's great to see you this morning. And our first question comes from Tim Holm in San Lorenzo, California. And Tim says, I have heard of people purchasing HDMI dummy plugs. What are these used for?
Go ahead, TJ.
These little plugs here, you plug them into your computer and it makes your operating system think you have a second monitor, even though you don't maybe have room for it. And then certain pieces of software like Zoom, for instance, will give you two display options when you have two monitors. But if you only have one monitor, you only see one window. So if you want to have the two-window operation of Zoom, you plug this in and then you get both windows.
Okay, David.
I actually use one of those on a Mac that I use for playback via MIDI. So I'll use the dummy plug, set that as my primary work surface, RDP or VNC into the Mac, and then playout goes out over the HDMI connector into the ATEM. So that way I'm not using two ports on the switcher where one is just for management of the machine. It's just strictly the output goes into my switcher and I'm good to go for show.
And Guy.
Yeah, same thing. We use them to fake seeing a second monitor. So we're mostly using it for screen capture. So via NDI. So NDI will now see that as another display that we can now grab onto whatever's inside of there.
All right, next question.
Alexander Knight comes up next from here in the panel in Vancouver, British Columbia. On an ATEM, when you capture a still, how do you auto fade to the still that's in your media pool?
Go ahead, Nigel.
Well, I'm assuming here we're going to take the still we've captured and then put it into our media pool, select it as one of the media devices, go back to your main screen, make sure your downstream, one of your downstream keys is set to the media player, and then that button will operate bring up your still. And if you press the auto and you have it set to fade, it should fade in and out.
Courtney?
Yeah, Nigel pretty much covered it. Just drop it into that little button that says media player, and then you can switch or you can fade. And I haven't captured this still in quite a while, so it doesn't quite match up, but just use the auto button.
All right, and Jesse.
And here is the visual version of that. We've got our media pool here. I'm going to drop in a clip. This is just something off of Midjourney. Make sure you load it into your media pool. The overhead view, we're going to switch from cut to auto, and you've got a whole bunch of different transitions that you can play with. And then when you're ready to go to that image, you tap the media pool, and it should do the fade as you're expecting.
Wonderful. Next question.
David Brady's up next, also on the panel, this time from New York City, though. And David says, the LG Quad 43UN700-B has an RS-232C port, but it's terminated in a 3.5 millimeter plug, which is a little unusual for control. With less and less serial ports out there, is there a way to use USB native without a bunch of adapters?
Go ahead, Alex.
I think a bunch of adapters is the key word there. I believe that Mouser actually makes a USB to, it's just a cable that's a USB on one end and the RS-232C on the other end. And so you can plug those directly in. Now, I don't know how that protocol works, but it is just a single cable. So it's not a bunch of adapters that need to, and there's also a plethora of USB to RS-232, the standard, 9-pin or whatever that's there. So there's a lot of those you can get, but I think Mouser makes one that actually goes to that 1/8-inch jack that you're looking for.
And is that Mouser M-A-U?
M-O-U-S-E-R.
Okay.
I think that they have one. We had to connect some kind of stenographer thing that needed that one little cable, and I don't know if they still have it, but if they have it, it's useful.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, these adapters are pretty cheap. They're about $11 RS 232 9-pin to USB. Look for one that is FTDI chipset because they're more compatible across all platforms. The prolific ones were counterfeited for a while and will give problems. But if you have to do a two-step process and go 9-pin to 3.5 millimeter, and then this cable that I just showed to go from USB to serial.
Next question.
Jack Cannon's up next from Phoenix, Arizona. And Jack says, when you use Polycam to scan a room, is it better to use a tripod or is just holding your phone good enough? I'll be scanning a room today and I'm looking for the best results.
Go ahead, Alex.
If you're using the Matterport software, you probably want to use a tripod because it has its own little head that will sit on top of it that will let you kind of organize it. So it is a great little head, and it'll let you build tours of a location from that piece. But if you are, I wouldn't put the camera on there if you don't have the Matterport software and I think hardware. I've never used it without that. In general, it's using the parallax and the LiDAR to figure out where it's at. So it does a pretty good job. If you're trying to walk around, you're going to have a hard time. So you don't want to walk more than about a 5-foot radius around. You can kind of move around. You can get around things, but the thing is, as the more you walk, it's going to eventually lose calibration. So you have to kind of wave things around. You're better off if you really want to detail. I've walked all over spaces and gotten something that was okay. But what you end up having is you end up having something where the floor goes like this and then goes down like this and goes across or something like that. It loses some kind of calibration over a couple inches. And so a lot of times, one of the things you have to just remember is if you have something, if you're here, you're casting geometry shadows, from anything that you can't see. So you have to figure out a way that you're going to wander around these areas. Now, a lot of times what you want to do is capture the area here, and you can walk around a little bit and get some parallax, but don't go too far because again, it'll lose calibration. Then you can do other captures and then piece those back together. They should all fit in scale, and you're going to get a lot more detail that way. It is a little bit more work. You can walk around a complex room and get something, and I would do that just to make sure you had something that you walked away with. But a more detailed version would be you move around a little bit, get some parallax, and then do another one and do 3 or 4 of them if it really matters. Then you're really trying to get all the detail out of the room that Polycam's capable of giving you.
Next question.
Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York is up next. I attended 2 paid New Year's events with A-list authors or teachers. Both were on dark laptop cams and off mic. One's host didn't even know how to mute all. The other started 45 minutes late due to tech issues. How would I approach them that they need to hire me?
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, the phrase "you could lead a horse to water, but you can't make a drink" does come to mind, doesn't it? Because here we've had 2 years of opportunity, but then the horse still doesn't want to drink. So I'm being that this is the Brainstorming for Business Day, I was thinking, how do we flop the question and ask, how can I help make you more money? Or how can I help you reach your audience better? Because telling somebody that you want them to spend money, that's oftentimes a knee-jerk reaction against what you were trying to do is help them make satisfied customers, which you apparently are not. So there's my two cents.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you have to have is, in this case, when you're trying to kind of get someone to go that direction, I think that this is where you do need to have a demo reel of the things that you've already done to show them, like, hey, this is there, and have a little web page. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to build the nicest web page in the world, but it has to have some clear examples and talk about your services. I don't do a lot of cold calling, so I don't really know. But those are the things that you would want to have for that type of thing. And then what I would recommend is just saying, hey, I saw that you had some issues. This is what I do. If you need any input, I wouldn't try to sell them on anything like you should hire me. I would say if you need, if you'd like some tips and tricks on how to do this, I'm happy to help. And the first step is to I don't worry about trying to have people turn over and immediately hire me to do the thing. I'll give them some help to just get started. And eventually, if what they're doing grows, they end up hiring me. But it's not. I don't worry about the very first time they have to hire me for a show. I just want to, you know, you just want to, be useful. And it often turns out with the right clients.
Yeah, as Alex said, like serving first. So coming in as you were part of the event and you saw how some ways that they can improve for the next time. Really think of it as a relationship building strategy. And I would also make sure that I do that relatively soon while it's still on their minds of the event. And, not wait a week or two. Just kind of come in with some helpful tips. That way, if and when something happens again in the future, that you're there, but focusing on the relationship building part of things, because whoever has done this, they hosted this event, they probably have other events as well that they do. Alex?
Yeah. And I know that there's a lot of people who will do something like, well, what I get paid to do is give people advice, but I don't get paid to give people advice. I get paid to do jobs, and so I get paid to execute events. So usually when people ask me, like, I'll sit there and have conversations with them and give them any information that I have and help answer their questions. And then they'll say, well, when do we start paying you? And I'm like, when I have to start canceling things, and there's deadlines, and there's things that are there, and I have to start doing things and showing up and delivering things, then you're going to start paying me. And it costs money, So, but if you want to talk for a half an hour, a week, I'm fine with that. And I've done that for some clients. I've done that for 3 or 4 months of just being in meetings and answering questions and everything else. And that it grows into something, if you're good at having those things. You can't do it for everybody, but you can when you see a good client or a potential client that you really want to work with. It's really good to just kind of have a long leader. And my angle on that is that they're trying to solve something, and I'm going to figure out how to solve it. And then they'll either hire me to solve it for them, or I'm going to solve it for somebody else. But I want to be in the conversation to see what people want to do with this technology next.
Bill?
Also, show them what you saw. If you're in a meeting and it's not going well like that, do some screen capture just to make sure that when you approach them, you can say, I was in your event. Here's what it looked like to me, because they might have seen something that was slightly different, maybe slightly better, or didn't notice things like the audio problems. If you can do a screen capture and document what you saw as the consumer's experience, showing them that, and then showing them another event that you did where it is obviously superior, can help give them that, that's my problem.
And Courtney?
Yeah, Bill has it right. Just talk to the producers of the event and convince them that with just a little bit of effort and a little bit of money, you can contact the authors. Because a lot of times in these promo events like this, where you're paying, the authors may be appearing free to promote their new book or new sales of whatever new thing that they're representing or that they've created. So they may be getting just a stipend to appear on the show, and they may not want to put any effort into it because they're not getting paid that much money, and they're promoting their book, and they look at it, well, I can do it from home. I don't have to fly anywhere, and I'll just open up my laptop and appear in the Zoom meeting. But if you can convince the producers of the show, if they're charging people to attend this paid online event, that they could spend $300 on a 360 link. It's a 360 link and even the $20 pile fake microphone works pretty well. USB microphone will work well enough to get it close to them and get good sound and good video, and maybe a newer light, and send it to them and let the celebrities keep them for that price. It's probably just about what you'd be paying them anyway.
And Alex?
Admittedly, one thing that is really a problem right now is that the quality assurance from broadcasters has been so pitiful that it's kind of ruined the experience, and it's really hard. It is an uphill battle to work with anybody who does this regularly, because what they say all the time is, I do this all the time, and everyone says I sound fine, and you're like, you do not sound fine. There's this very emperor has no clothes syndrome going on in broadcast, where everyone's told that they sound fine, and they do not sound fine. And we fight this all the time with the podcast that we work on, where we say, we really want to send you a mic. Oh, I use this mic all the time for NPR, and and you're like, you shouldn't. And about half of them buy the mic, not from us. They've just, where do I get this mic? So anyway, that's, and it's just a simple thing to fix. But you want to try to give them simple solutions to start with.
Next question.
Mike Edwards is in next from Brooklyn, New York. And Mike says, morning, guys. What size and brand of monitors would you want to wall mount in a control room build? Operators sit about 5 to 6 feet away from a potential screen, trying to decide between the LG 43-inch quad, something bigger, or multiple 27 to 32-inch monitors. Thoughts?
Let's start with Courtney.
I would just get you a multi-view adapter and go with a 55-inch, whatever you have the space for on the wall, and go into your multi-view up to a 16 multi-view so that you can arrange how many monitors you want to feed in and where you want them in that 55-inch square piece. Maybe a couple of them side by side, 255s side by side might work for you with a multi-view adapter feeding both of them.
Mark?
So I agree with Courtney. The size of each quad on an LG 43 is 21 inches, so it might be a little bit small if you're trying to read print from 5 to 6 feet away.
And David?
And I guess it also depends on the real estate that you have. If you're over in Brooklyn there, Mike, I know real estate is a premium. So I think the multi-view that Courtney recommends is definitely the way to go. I've got a few Roland ones I'm pulling out of a rack next week, but they're old analog ones, but I'm still going to repurpose them for something.
Mitchell?
Agree on the main monitor, whether it be 55 inches or 43, that you use the console or a high quality adapter from AJ or Blackmagic to do the multi-view. For the rest of the monitors, and it can get real expensive at this point, you build a matrix of say 31-inch Sony broadcast monitors of the PVM series or the B series. The Bs will cost you about $33,000 per. So be careful how you spend your money.
And Alex?
Sorry. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of 24 and 27-inch monitors with a couple big 55s. So big 55s across the top where people can see them and you can look up at them and you've got resolution somewhere. And then the work ones that I'm in front of, 24 if you can find a 4K 24, but that's actually pretty hard. A lot of times you have to go to 27 to get 4K, and then you can do multi-views into that relatively effectively because that means all your quads are 1080. So I look at the resolution for them. I want them all to be 4K, and I want, again, all of my operational monitors that are right in front of me are usually 24 or 27, and the upper ones I usually make 55s.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Ray Franklin at Mount Dora. And Ray says, what exercise do you routinely do sitting at your desk? What physical activity do you do just before a 3-hour virtual meeting? I make it a practice to do at least 1 minute of stretching and moving in my chair before a long event.
Let's start with TJ.
I stand up every hour because I wear an Apple Watch. It's always reminding me to stand up once an hour. So I'll do that even during a long meeting. And a lot of times when we're at our desk, we're kind of hunched over. So I make it a point to kind of move my shoulders back and try to open up my chest area and tighten the back muscles a little bit just to kind of stretch.
David?
I actually fractured a knee a couple of years ago, and I have one of these under-desk bicycle things. So sometimes if you see me moving like this, it's because I'm pedaling away. It's not the power. It's not for backup power or anything, but yeah.
Can you share that in the chat? That's the first time I've heard of an under-desk bicycle thing. That sounds interesting. Mitchell?
It's important how you sit, first of all, to reduce those problems. A couple of the tips I can give you to my chiropractor friend is make sure your feet are flat on the floor and that you have some thigh support. And then the other part is your lumbar area should be supported. Once you have those, you're less likely to build too much tension, and you do build tension in your shoulders. So if you roll your shoulders while you're sitting there, that's good. Also, shake your hands because that's an area where you also build up tension, hanging your hands over a mouse or a button, things like that. And remember to stand up, like TJ says, to make sure your whole body gets a stretch. And don't forget your eyes. Try to focus your eyes on a distant object every once in a while so they get a little bit of exercise too. But most importantly, flat feet, support on your thighs and your lumbar.
I remember Chris Comfort, who used to say that about the eyes and looking at your distance. Guy?
Well, as we know, we are expensive friends. So I'm going to go to a standing desk option. I wasn't a big fan until recently. I was working with my director editor at his house, and he has a standing desk, and I tried it. And I was editing. I mean, I will focus on an edit for hours at a time. So I will completely forget and slouch over and hunch and really bad health. But as a standing desk, actually, I was working for like 6 hours and was happy. So there's an idea. And they're not as expensive as they could be. So you can get like some cheapies and some mid-range for a couple $100.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it's funny. In high school, when we were learning to lift weights and exercise, it was all like the bench press and the curls and all this manly football player stuff. And then a couple of years ago, one of my coworkers turned me on to doing some of this beach body on demand stuff. And at first I was like, man, this is like girly stuff. But then I started to feel my core. And so even sitting here, I can like flex my core. And that's one of the ones that I can do while sitting on my desk while on show. Then from those exercises, I developed this thing that I do in between these workout or in between these sessions is plank to downward dog to warrior to upward. Then I kind of do that a second time. Then I do a headstand, and then downward dog again. Then crossover, and then that. So that's my routine, and I'll put it up on TikTok or something. So then you'll have.
Yes, you've got to do that. That was awesome. Jesse?
We actually designed our studio exactly around this. So I've got 2 desks, one for sitting and one for standing. I'm at the standing desk now, and I do all the front-facing communications standing.
Bill?
Guy, I got sore just watching that. I started walking after I came out of pandemic. I had put on some weight, and I just thought I got to get back healthier again. So I started first walking. Then I read an article, and I don't know where it came in, but it said if you want to get a little upper body workout at the same time, there's a thing called Nordic walking. So my wife gave me a set of poles and I don't know why, but for some reason that just clicked into my head. And that combined with my AirPods and something from Audible means that I can listen to a novel. I only do novels because I want to zone out on somebody who writes well, listen to a story. And I got to tell you, most days I take off to start this walking process, and I kind of wake up when I get back, not even realizing that I've been doing that up and down the hills and things like that. It just takes my brain away from the repetitiveness of the task and makes it something I really look forward to.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of room here, and sitting here for almost 3 hours kind of wears on me for a while. I lean back to take a lot of weight off the lower spine and lean forward. It drives the technical directors crazy here on the panel. And toward the end of the show, I have to straighten my legs out, and I don't have room to do that because there's 2 PCs right on my knees. So I'll have to turn sideways so I can stretch. So later in the show, you'll see me turning sideways and looking at them. Because if you don't straighten your legs out, you can suffer deep vein thrombosis. You can get blood clots in your legs. And so it's important to straighten them out every now and then. And if you can, get up and walk around. But if you can't, at least straighten them out and get a little exercise in.
Much like TJ, the Apple Watch reminds me, so I'll stand every now and then. Sometimes on the show, you'll see me. So this is secrets. I try to do it really quietly, but I'll like lift my legs so I can just kind of straighten up and just like do a stretch there. Also, I used to play basketball, so I have tight IT bands at times. So I've got like a little therapy ball that I'll like roll out both on my feet. So I'll roll. So just like Courtney just said, the circulation and getting that moving around, or I'll just like roll it around my IT band. So I have this handy to keep the movements going. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Alexander Knight here on the panel in Vancouver, British Columbia. Is there a Unity Comms iOS app? My mixer has a signable talkback that can be assigned to Bluetooth. That would be convenient for talking to people on the back end without muting myself in Zoom.
TJ?
There is an iOS Unity client app. We have found that using that particular app on on Wi-Fi has been problematic, and we have gotten better results when people move over directly to using their cellular connection instead of Wi-Fi with it.
Go ahead, Alex.
And if you're not moving around, of course, you can give your phone an Ethernet connection too. So you can actually plug into that phone, split that out, and put an Ethernet cable into it. So when we're doing high profile events, a lot of times if we're not walking around, we'll take an iPad or a phone and actually connect it to Ethernet to make sure that we're getting the best connection we can.
Next question.
Next question is from somebody named Liberty White, who's up in Toronto. And Liberty says, after attending a funeral in person, I found that the audio on the stream's replay was replaced by royalty-free music. Is this normal? It was not a positive experience as it interrupted speakers.
Yeah, and just to share for you, David, like it was really weird because they had a descriptor on the live saying like they're replacing it with royalty-free music, but then there are certain parts where people were speaking and you could not hear the eulogy or anything. So it was just a really bad experience. So go ahead, David.
Yeah, I don't think it's normal, but I've been seeing more and more of that. On my Sunday place, we don't even use music of any sort, and yet Facebook has been striking us that we're using some in-sync song, and I keep constantly challenging it, telling them that no, this is not true, and they'll eventually take it down. But the normal thing that I've seen is they'll just silence it completely in certain regions. The replacing I've never heard of yet, but yeah, I can see that being a real drag, especially when there's a spoken word part of things. Because they're not mixing it, they're just putting it over it.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, what we've been doing is just using Zoom Webinar instead, and that way we totally have control. We're not going through a CDN, so that way it's not public. We give out the credentials to whoever we need to, and then they can appear, but we also record it, and then we can share it either with a password or without, encrypted and all that. So it's a nice way to have access to those recorded files and be able to have it live, but not worry about any kind of copyright. So I would recommend if it's less than $500, it's fairly inexpensive. I think it's $100 a month for Zoom Webinar. So that would be an option to let the service, whoever's streaming the service, to let them know that that's a better option than YouTube or Facebook.
Yeah, it was a funeral home. So that's why I also asked, like, is this a trend that we're going to see more with, whether they be SaaS platforms or that outsource or that funeral homes now purchase that service? Because that would definitely be an opportunity for someone to figure out how to get the technology, the software technology to work around that. Alex?
Yeah, you'd think that a funeral home would be small enough that they could get away with just having whatever's in the music there. But the reality is that most funeral homes, the vast majority of them are owned by only a handful of companies, and they're very large. And so most likely that makes them great targets for copyright, for BMI and ASCAP and so on and so forth. They have a central place to go. If they were all independent operators, they wouldn't probably be worth the trouble. But as a large corporation, infringing on any kind of copyright would be problematic for them. There's a high probability that they have the rights to play it during the service, but not the rights to maintain a recording of it, and to replay it. And so, but it's because I think it's only 2 or 3 companies own like 90% of the funeral homes out there, and so it's they've kind of because that allows them to centralize logistics, around what it takes to do what they do. And so they so anyway, so I think that's probably what happened. Is it's probably part of that larger chain.
Makes sense. David?
Just curious, was it the actual recording that was used, or was it like the in-house organist, for instance, playing along? Because if it's the latter, they must have been really good to get that kind of strike against them. Just curious.
Right. It was, there was some music playing in the speakers, but it was mainly, there was a vocalist and a pianist. So that's, again, just going back to how, and that was really quick because I went to watch it that night. So lots of great insights there. Next question.
Steve Uroff, in Madison, Wisconsin says, does anyone know of an iPhone or Watch OS app that can send a Zoom mute or unmute keystroke to a paired Mac OS device or be used for push to talk?
Go ahead, Alex.
I don't think there's an app that I know of that does that, but I think that you might be able to use shortcuts to do that. So to take something from, use shortcuts to have a shortcut on your watch that activates something else on your Mac.
Bill?
Yeah, the one thing I would say, if you're going to try to do it with your watch, I've noticed that because you're always wearing your watch, and I started with an iWatch number 1, and then I moved to a 3, and I have a 7 now. They're very distinct about if you have a button or something like that and you need to push it, you often need to be very intentional about that and sometimes use the deep push in order to get it to actuate. I would be a little leery if this is something like mute, unmute that you're going to be doing a good little bit, that a watch interface would be the right way to do that, because I think they're pretty sensitive to the fact they don't want you to do a lot of unintended touches because your watch is just something that you wear and you have on a lot. So test it out before you do that for something that you're going to make money from.
Next question.
Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany is up next. What exactly does the aperture curve in the Insta360 Link controller do? When would it be helpful?
Alex?
Yeah, so the curve works basically like what you would see in Photoshop. So you have basically your in and your out is typically the way you have it, and the curve goes like this. And so this basically says when it's this value, it goes out exactly the same value. When it's at that 45 degree, it's going out the same way it's going in. Now, if you grab this, and this generally affects the gamma, you can pull this up like that. You can pull the center piece up so it's curved like this. So now it says when you come in at 50, you're going to come out at a brighter number. And so that's how you can add a little bit of brightness to the center. Now you can do things that are much more complex, where you might want to do something where you save a little bit of the blacks and then you make it a little darker in the center and you save a little bit of the whites, or do something where you start to build, and that's probably not a good example, but it's something that you oftentimes you'll do something like an S curve, and that's going to save the white, save the blacks, and make it a little bit more contrasty in the center to make that work. What you don't want to do is go across like this, because that'll just turn everything into gray or that gray that goes across. So you'll create posterization there. But this allows you to do, the fine tuning that we would expect in Photoshop. That would allow you to do a lot of the same types of things. If you really, it's the only webcam I've ever seen that lets you have Photoshop level control over your exposure. And so it's pretty cool. I will say the Link on its own does a pretty good job of color and exposure. But if you want to fine tune that and get it just the way you want it, that's what that tool does.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, Alex explained it really well. The gamma adjustment, a lot of times people use it to reveal shadow details. So if you've got a background that's not lit very well, but you want it to be, you want people to see the detail or read something or see the detail that's behind you, you bring up that hump in the middle. So it increases the gain in the mid range, and you can bring up the shadow detail and see stuff would normally clip to black or crush to black.
Next question.
Stefan Fischer's done. We're moving to Liberty White here again in Toronto. And this time she asked, Jesse, thanks for the ATEM demo. What are you using for your overhead camera setup?
Yeah, that was just so clear. And I was like, yes, I could ask this question today because I've seen people with boom arms, and this is a really small space. And we use a kitchen countertop. So even clamping can be challenging. So I'm looking forward to what you have to share.
I believe I have overbuilt this, but I'll show you what I've got going on. So the overhead camera is Blackmagic micro cinema camera. It's the 1920 by 1080 version. And what I've got is a C-stand with a boom arm going overhead, and that's got a Rode NTG. That's the 2, I believe. Maybe that's the 2. And we've got the camera in a cage with, that's actually a M4 II. That's a vintage lens that we use on it, just because we like busting out the old lenses. They're a bit fun. So that's what we got going on. Thank you for asking.
Very neat. Thanks, Jesse. Next question.
Aaron Giancarlo, Flagstaff, Arizona, up next with purchasing multiple BirdDog PTZ cameras. Should I purchase the controller, or would Companion run through a Stream Deck and work just as well?
Sky?
As an operator, I'm first going to ask, what is your use case? Because if you're doing a tennis match, you would want something that has lots of flexibility and lots of control. If you're just moving it from one thing to the next consistently, you probably can do some automations with even within the software and just the little remote control. So I guess that's if you're going to do a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of continuous use of movement, I would definitely want a handheld control.
Guy?
Yeah, it's nice to have the actual controller so that you can just grab on. This one's a different controller that you can pick up for like $300 or $400. This does not work with the BirdDog. So if you see this one, there's some knockoff ones from China that I'm controlling. This is like a $299 device that you could find. It's meant for security cameras, but you can find it on Amazon. And then over here, I do have, and I'm controlling. This is an EPTZ camera by HuddleCam. So it's a really cheap NDI camera. I think it's the cheapest NDI camera on the market. So all in all, I'm in this like $600. The benefit of this is that you can sort through 99 cameras. You can also assign presets here and have the physical tactile buttons. But over here, I have my Bird Dog software control on a 32 button Stream Deck. So I can go up, down, left, right. And then on another page, I have all of my recall and save presets. So it just depends on how you want to work. If you want to be able to just grab onto a physical thing and move in and out, it's kind of nice to have the joystick control. And again, this is a cheap one. If you go to like Panasonic or you go to Sony, you get way better controls. This is kind of a Mickey Mouse setup. Again, this is for security cameras, but it works okay for what it is.
Next question.
Claudio Leghieri in Rome says, is it possible to stream a 360 video inside a Zoom conference and let everyone look around independently the same way it would be possible with the YouTube platform?
Alex?
I don't think that that's possible right now to do that. And I will say that it's something that people are interested in. It's oftentimes doesn't have the best experience. Like it's as a user, I've done a lot of 360 experimentation with using it in conferences and using it in concerts and using it at events. And what happens is people tend to put it right in the middle. And then you have an experience that actually you would never have in the room and you would not want, which is that you're sitting in the middle of the table looking like this around people behind you. That's not how you exist, when you do that. And so we've done things where we put it, where we put that 360, at the table, like at a where you could just sit and look around. And with the VR goggles, that actually doesn't work. Isn't that bad, but it still felt like it was a little like you were just trying to use the technology. It tends not to make it that much better than a wide angle.
Courtney?
Yeah, real 360, the regular 360 cameras, which stitch together two wide-angle lenses that are back-to-back into a single global view, probably wouldn't work because you have to decode them and stitch them together in real time and then somehow have a driver that would interface to Zoom that way. The best way would be to use the 360 link. And because that's got a real gimbal and outputs a regular flat 1080p signal or 4K signal, you can then, in Zoom, request camera control. So anyone can request camera control on that 360 link and pan it around. But they would pan it around for everybody instead of just for their point of view.
And David?
Yeah, I think at Zoomtopia, some of the manufacturers, Logi and Neat, are going to be introducing their 360 cameras that are a supplement to Zoom Rooms. And then using the Smart Director, it's going to allow, give everybody a face at the table. Currently, Zoom Rooms will also do their multi-camera setup. I have one at work. And the bottom camera here, although it's dark, it's hard to see. That's one of those pano to big ultra wide camera, but that's a bad example. Sorry about that. But yeah, to Courtney's point, you wouldn't be able to independently scroll around the room. It would be one for everybody because there's only one piece of glass.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Alexander Knight here on the panel, Vancouver. What's the difference between the Brother P-Touch Cube and the more expensive Plus model? I bought the cheaper version by accident and I've been enjoying it. Am I missing anything critical?
TJ?
The P-Touch Cube is powered by 6 AA batteries. The Cube Plus has an internal lithium-ion rechargeable battery that you can put into a USB-C port. They both pretty much take the same labels. The P-Touch Plus has a few more fonts available to it, has a couple more storage ability for saving labels. But I would say if you are happy with your purchase and using it, stick with it. And hopefully your first label was one for the label maker.
Mitchell?
A good choice on the Brother because they do a great job of what they do. Moving up the line, you can go all the way up to USB connected units that accept these XL cartridges of various sizes. This is a 1-inch and this is a 1.5 inch. So the software will run with just about all of them. So it's a great product.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm old-fashioned in this thing. The one thing I think you're missing is a keyboard. I have my D800 has been around with me for probably 20 years now. And the thing I love about having a keyboard on a label maker is those times I'm in the field and I suddenly realize, oh my gosh, I have to change this and change the labels. Not needing even my phone or anything else to get that accomplished, I think is a joy. So I'm a Luddite in that respect. I like a keyboard on my label maker.
And Alex?
And I have a Cube Plus, and we buy them. They're kind of standard issue for us. And we used to have lots of ones with keyboards, and it was a space issue. The ability to throw something into a bag that is really small and easy to drop into a pocket somewhere is pretty useful. The Plus has a greater variety of labels that you can put in, greater width. I think you can actually put those larger ones that Mitch was showing into the Plus, but not into the regular one. But I will admit that I never used them. I bought them, but I always use the smaller ones. And one of the things to note also is that the 6mm print will fit right on the end of an SSD drive. So if you're using lots of hyperdecks, it'll just fit right there. You make a little white print on black, and it just goes right across that little bit there. It's great for labeling those. So anyway, it's a great label maker. Both of them are great. The Plus is a bit better.
And Mitchell?
I also use it for self-laminating wire labels. So all my wires are labeled, all my HDMI cables, USB, Ethernet, they're all labeled with it. And what's neat, what I mean by self-laminating, you wrap it around and then the clear part rolls over the writing so it doesn't get smudged.
And what we do in that area is we'll put those on and then we'll shrink wrap it. So heat shrink, clear heat shrink over it. So you put your label into it, then we put a clear heat shrink over it and shrink it over that. And that really makes it part of the cable.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from TJ Asher, a panelist from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He says, in the last week, the Aperture Situs Link app lost all my presets, and now I cannot control my fixtures individually. Is there any alternative to the Situs Link app for controlling my Aperture B7C lights?
Alex?
What happened, TJ?
I have no idea. I opened the app one day and suddenly all of my presets were gone. So I had a bunch of different presets for office hours, different color backgrounds and what have you. And then I come in, I turn them on, and it's like all the presets were gone. And it's been a struggle to get the top one is normally a white light and the background is, a different color. And I turn it on and they're all the same color. So it's
and you can't change them. You can't get to each individual light now.
No. And then I try to change each one and it's like, it's not working. I don't know what is going on here.
My guess is that you have automatic updates on. So it updated.
I do not automatic update anything.
Oh, that's interesting. Because that usually is an OS change or an app change might precipitate that.
I was thinking the app change guy.
Yeah, I was just looking at it myself. It says that it was updated 2 weeks ago, so I have it here running on my Mac Mini M1 because it is a native iOS app. But yeah, you can see right here the whopping 2 ratings, which brings it down to 3.0. So I don't know if there's another app, but yeah, you can see right here version history 1.9.5 was updated 2 weeks ago. And so I'm wondering if something happened in that update that messed it up for you. But it is a cool app when it's working because you can control multiple fixtures and there's lots of stuff that you can do as far as matching colors and things like that. But hopefully it gets working for you, TJ.
Next question.
Paul Terry Wallace, Austin, Texas. And Paul asks, is there a way to connect a bunch of Wyze, W-Y-Z-E, or other security cameras to a Synology network-attached storage device and avoid cloud charges for storage and analysis of security footage?
John?
You've perfectly identified the problem with most of these. They're encrypted from stream to server and cloud, and that's how they get you. So you have to pay for the cloud fees. And Nest does the exact same thing. So that's the reason why I like Access. You have complete control over the stream, and you can record it locally on a NAS if you wanted to.
Courtney?
Well, if you want to just preserve what's there, all those Wyze cameras have micro SD card slots in them. You can put you a 400 gigabyte card in there and record. They will record locally every time you switch them or turn them on or they detect something moving. That way you don't pay any cloud fees and it's stored locally and you always have access to it.
And David?
I checked the Synology App Store, whatever. They have a lot of apps. There might be a DVR-like thing you could rig up for cameras throughout your house. That would be where I'd go for that.
Next question.
Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin, weighing in next. Netflix released the show Kaleidoscope on New Year's. The limited series randomizes the episodes with a final episode to wrap it up, but it's not a choose your own adventure. How can this idea be better utilized for a fun experience?
Courtney?
Years ago, I remember at a World's Fair in San Antonio in 1968, there was a Czechoslovakian theater called Kino Automat, which was basically, and it was difficult to do with film projection back then, but you'd choose, the audience would vote on the direction that the film would take. And they'd have a series of branch points, and you'd have to carefully construct your storyline so you could take different paths but arrive at the same conclusion. And so just with careful scripting, you could do something like this and have different episodes in different orders that have similar branch points, but and a branch point back to a common conclusion at the last episode. So it's possible to do. You just have to figure out. It takes a lot of clever writing and clever transitions between scenes to branch off into a different direction so that the audience can kind of pick the direction of the story that they want to see. Jesse?
The trouble with this kind of thing is that it's usually too clever by half. You spend so much time organizing your thoughts around what I would call a story gimmick that you lose sight of the story. I'm a bit of a story absolutist. I feel like in the same way that lens elements are put in a certain order to create a clear image, story elements also need to be put in a certain order to create a clear story. So I'd be interested to watch this, but it sounds like more gimmick than protein, more sugar than protein, whatever it is.
Alex?
It was a horrible idea. No, I think it was just, so what everybody did is that they put it out there, and then a bunch of us just waited for somebody to tweet what the order was, and then everyone watched it in that order. That's the behavior that was created, because if you watch the wrong one, then now you've jacked up the whole experience. It's just a horrible idea. I don't know whoever thought of that, but they should, I guess they make a lot of content so they can make mistakes, but that was a mistake. The choose your own adventures have largely been a failure as well. Content creators love that idea, or not the content creators love that idea. The people who think about trying to figure out how to do interactive television, are the people who, they're trying to find the next new thing. So they go, okay, we're going to do choose your own adventure, and everybody hates it. It's just, there's 4 people that think it's great, and it's all, as was stated before, a gimmick. Interactive television is letting people interact with, there's a lot of ways to do that, and this isn't it, this is executives trying to be cool like the kids.
So to Courtney's point earlier about the writers, and I was hoping Sky was going to jump in on this one, being the storyteller, there's no way that they could write it so that it doesn't matter what order it comes in. It could be different narratives.
You looked at Memento, it started from the back and went forward. So, you could get creative with it, but the thing is most people want to sit down and just have a good story, and none of these gimmicks actually ever turn into something that people remember, except for Memento, but that was designed that way,
Right.
But outside of that, it was, but that was still designed to be watched the way it was watched. It was not. It was still a linear experience of that piece there. Now, I think that there are huge opportunities to do things that let people explore the characters, and I think you're seeing some of that with what the Marvel Universe does with lots of different characters. Andor is a great example of something that is a bit character in Rogue One that becomes, they built an entire show on it, and I think that there's a huge opportunity to build content and then have ancillary content. You could have Instagram by the characters, or you could have little 5-minute things on YouTube that explore the characters. So if you never watch the YouTube segments, it's fine. But there's backstory that you could get in other platforms and other things that let people who are really into it explore it. And I think that those are the kind of things that are really interesting that no one's doing. But this linear, they're just jostling it up is just all a gimmick.
Heroes did that really well. NBC Heroes, They were the originators, I think, in doing that. Mitchell?
Yeah, I'm sorry you see my facial expressions. I think Alex is onto something. You can't mess with a story arc. And to have other people making that decision that aren't the directors and the writers, I just don't think it's gonna turn out well. It's going to end in tears, so to speak. But the idea of a different perspective maybe a different camera angle, maybe the perspective of the story as seen by a child in the scene, whatever. That might be interesting to see a little bit of an angle. So you can watch the movie the way it was meant to be done and then see it from a little bit different perspective with the same storyline without people hacking it up and doing weird things to it.
Courtney?
Yeah, I think the real reason that they do this, especially in streaming episodic television, is to get repeat views, because people will say, well, I wonder what would have happened if I'd branched the other way at this point, or watched this episode before this episode. And so they'll go back and view it again. And that way they're chalking up repeat views, and they can get more money from their advertisers for that.
Jesse?
And when I say I am a structure absolutist, I'm not saying I'm a hero's journey absolutist. So things like Memento, Pulp Fiction, Knives Out, those are incredibly structured and incredibly deliberate, even if they aren't a straight line from, minute 1 to minute 90.
Thanks for clarifying that. Nigel?
Yes, I feel like I've seen a number of series where it may be vastly improved if I watched it in random order. But mostly I think the thing that's done better is what MCU has done, or I did until recently at least, which is invest in the people who invest in them and allow you to explore additional storylines, additional characters. You had Michael Connolly on the show that you do, the radio show, and I think he's done this particularly well, which is the more time you invest in his characters, the more return you get, because they live between the storylines. And I think that's the way you keep something solid.
And Alex?
I once someone put up an edit at some point, I don't think it's still up there, that they took Lost and they actually had a couple hours of Lost where they took out all the flashbacks. And it actually is a pretty intense thing to do, because suddenly you don't know why everybody's doing what they're doing, but they're all doing it. It's like taking all that stuff out. And what was interesting was it didn't actually take away from it. I still would have watched the show. But that's where I think that you could do backstories where, if you think about all the Lost flashbacks, what if you showed some of them or didn't show any of them, and you just show a whole movie, and then there's all these flashbacks that you can actually watch somewhere else, or even there to find it, so that people can have a little more linear experience, but then also, dig into the characters as they want to.
Next question.
Jason Robertshaw in Sarasota, Florida says, I got an Elgato Stream Deck pedal for the holidays. Do you use pedals in your live events? And if so, how do you use it? And what other pedals are out there?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I have one as well. I'm still getting used to what I want to program it for, but you can see this is it. This is the size of it. So in comparison to like my hand, you can see how big it is. So when it's on the ground, I have mine set up. Well, I'm still trying to figure out how I want to do this, but mine is cut because I'm using vMix. So I have fade here, which cuts from whatever's in preview. And then I have mute and then playback if there's a video that needs to be played. So I'm still playing with these, but yeah, you could dial it into Companion and you can set these to whatever you want, or you could just use the native Stream Deck app. But yeah, that's it. Three buttons, goes on the floor. One USB-C it comes with USB-C to USB A connection. And yeah, cool gift. Whoever got that for you, that was a nice one.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, I know DJI drones don't do shows, but would a DJI Mini 3 Pro be a solid entry into the drone world?
Courtney.
Yes. They made a number of improvements. I have a DJI Mini, and it's a wonderful thing. It's below 240 grams, and the DJI Mini 3 Pro is also below 240 grams, or 249 grams. I'm below 250, which means it's free of registration and a lot of regulations that the the FAA puts on you if you're flying it in America. So it's a good entry point. It has anti-collision, stuff built into it, cameras so it'll avoid obstructions. So you can fly it without fear of running into walls or trees or things like that. So yeah, it's a great entry-level little drone. It's quiet. It's a lot quieter than a lot of the bigger drones. And it's a little hard to see if you have to maintain line of sight with it, because it kind of disappears because it's gray. You fly it up in the sky. It's really hard to see.
Guy?
Yes, I have the Mavic and the original Mavic and the Spark, and I haven't been flying them lately because I went to a drone school and heard of some of the repercussions and trouble you can get into for flying it where you're not supposed to. And I live within 3 miles of an airport, so I quit flying mine. But for the holidays, my brother-in-law got that exact one, the Mini Pro, and we were flying it 249 grams where we could fly it. He's not by an airport, but over the holidays, I had fun just zipping it around. The battery life is not as good as some of the bigger ones. The picture quality amazed me. We shot in 4K. We put it on his big screen, and compared to the Mavic, the original Mavic, the noise and the shadows, because we were flying at almost dusk, and the difference between the sunset and the city below, it was just spectacular. So I'd say that's an awesome one. It even got me wanting to get the bigger ones. I was off looking at the lens rentals about there's a new, what is it? It's not Micro Four Third. There's one that's like almost $10,000. It's from DJI now. It just renewed my interest. So I think that once you get into the drones, you get into that bug of like, oh, the image quality could be so much better. So it's one of those things where you get into it and you're probably going to want more. So, but yeah, I'd say that's a great entry level.
And TJ.
Yep. Courtney and Guy pretty much nailed it on everything. Just because it has collision avoidance detection doesn't mean you still can't run it into things like trees. Not that I've ever done that.
Great point. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, back again with this one. Is the competitor to ChatGPT called Jasper worth the 5-day free trial, then $990 a year after that?
Go ahead, John.
Sorry about that. My dog was scratching on the door. So Jasper uses the ChatGPT API. So they were founded in January of 2021. What's funny is they actually called themselves Jarvis, and they got a very interesting letter from Disney, and they changed their name to Jasper. But they're based on ChatGPT, and they're added additional value on top of ChatGPT. So they're not a competitor.
And Jesse?
And they have not updated all of their promotional materials on the website. You'll see some blocks of text that are still referring to Jarvis instead of Jasper. If you are going to get in on this, get in early, because think about your least favorite recipe that you find online with blocks and blocks of text before you get to the first ingredient. The promise of an entire internet with nothing but automatically generated blog posts devalues blog posts almost immediately. So get your value as quickly as you can on something like that.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up again. Guy, I really like how you use the security camera controller for PTZ cameras. Do you prefer using a joystick for PTZ cameras or a Stream Deck?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I really like the joystick. It's so much nicer just to be able to grab onto something, especially if you're in the heat of the moment and you need to get a shot right away. If somebody's yelling in your ear, like, get that shot, and you're like, it's so much easier just to grab on the joystick and point it to where you want. But yeah, that device for the money is pretty amazing. I put the link to it in the chat. I don't sell it. It's just one that I happened to stumble upon because I looked at the brand of one that was twice as expensive, and I was like, that looks familiar. And so if you have some IP-based cameras, it also does something called ONVIF, which gives you that ability to utilize the screen that's built in. So unlike a lot of other PTZ camera controllers from other brands, this one actually has the screen built in, so you can actually see what you're doing and you could be zooming in. And I also put a link to the NDI camera from HuddleCam. So this thing doesn't physically move, this one, but they make other ones, of course, that move. But yeah, again, cool device for $298.
Next question.
Comes to us from Mitch Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. Here on the panel, take a look at tsx.live. It would be fun to put our office hours panel up in Times Square for a shout out.
David?
I'm trying to find out or realize where that building is. I'm pretty sure it's across the street from the office I'll be moving into at the beginning or in the coming weeks. So if we pull it off and it's scheduled, let me know and I'll be sure to capture footage of the experience.
That would be neat. Mitchell?
Yeah, the app is kind of cool. They sell it as 15 seconds of fame. You can go in there and buy a short segment on one of the big screens. And I just thought that we've got our big panel here and we could all go, hi, or something, and do a little push for officehours.global. But there's quite a crowd there, and over the weekend, or heading into New Year's, there was like over 1 million people. So I'm not saying we could do it then, but right now, for example, will be fun.
TJ?
Our office hours own Phil Langer gave a demo how he runs a bunch of software that does most of the signage in Times Square.
And David?
Yeah, just found it. It's 1568 Broadway, which is 2 blocks north of where I'll be. I'm pretty sure I could see that corner, if it's the one I'm thinking of, from like our lodge or cafeteria kind of place. So let's do it.
Next question.
I was just going to say, there's a camera in after hours that Brandon has up, just showing the exact billboard.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Mitchell, if we were going to advertise ourselves on such a high visibility stage, wouldn't we want to have a pre-made 15-second quick hit teaser along with content? Say, learn more about big name movie X to appeal to a general audience.
David?
I gave a quick look at the app, and it looks like it's only from your phone. And I'm assuming it's like people in Times Square at the moment doing their little 15-second and sending it up and scheduling it. However, if we pre-produce it, put it on somebody's phone, then schedule it and put it up there, that might be doable.
Okay. And Mitchell?
What David said, plus just the idea of doing it live, just kind of, now we pause to go to Times Square, Times Square, and then off we go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to our producers for those questions during the first hour. Go ahead and share and submit your questions for our second hour as we transition into our brainstorm on Monday topics. And just looking at the past year plus of Mondays, it's typically been lots of some business elements. There have been leadership development types of topics we've touched on, also innovation. And I recall when our council met and we were just really diving into our Monday community and what you need. So this is the opportunity where you get to share your thoughts, what would help you in the next month, the next 12 months to help with your development as it relates to media tech, or is there another area that we should be delving into more? That's what we want to hear during this time. And I've really been thinking too that we've been really scratching the surface in some areas, because when we do talk about marketing, we'll touch on like social, like at a surface level, but there's pay per click and SEO. And so those are the things that we want to hear from you during this time. Alex?
Yeah, and all week we're going to be doing this. So think about them, and just to kind of give you the structure of how we're going to approach at least the first quarter. We're going to do this once a quarter. So we're just going to stop, talk about what we've looked at, spend a week kind of figuring out what we want to do next. And this is going to be kind of like a little pause every quarter just to decide where we're going. And then we're going to start trying to schedule out that quarter pretty completely. Mondays are really, we've been looking at them as basically business oriented, how we, the business of what we do, and Liberty's been incredible at bringing in guests and bringing in, different subject matters in that area. And we're going to keep on doing that. Tuesdays, we're really looking at graphics, things that computers make. So it's anything 2D, experimental, 3D, photogrammetry, all those things are going to be on Tuesdays. Wednesdays, of course, are audio. Thursdays are video, and Fridays we're really looking at the logistics of doing what we do. So, Liberty's, the Mondays are the business end of what we're doing, and they can be a little bit blurry there, but Friday is really like all things logistics. That might be AWS, it might be programming, it might be shipping and tape, and all kinds of other things. So it's not just IT, but really in general, how the nuts and bolts of getting something done. From a logistics perspective. And so those are things. And then, we will, I think that one of the things we're going to focus on also is like last week. I think Keely was great. And we want to have more like bringing creators in to talk about their journey in different areas from a business perspective. And we might bring in some lawyers to talk about, copyright and the legal issues and, those types of things. And so those are things to kind of frame this up. And we really want people brainstorming all this week to really give us a sense of what they want to see. These are probably one of the more important weeks of the year, so that you can really help define what we're going to be talking about in the coming months.
Yeah. And then even to you saying that as well, Alex, like just even thinking even businesses, that's so broad. There was at one point, I think it was in After Hours last week or the week before, and someone had shared, well, they don't necessarily tune in on Mondays because they're retired. And just thinking, oh, well, we do have a community of people who may not be in this space full time working for someone, but how else can we still serve them, or what else can we bring value? So you say that Mondays, it might be a little blurry in some areas because we're still shaping that. But this is where we want to hear in panel. Feel free to jump in at any time of just even when you think of Monday, or when you think of some of the needs that you might have as well, and how we can incorporate those conversations in Mondays. What are some of the questions in this space, in the innovation? We did some with the NFTs, and we there's someone crypto wise that we're looking at bringing into the wings. So even some of that, the curiosity part of the business and the leadership space. Nigel?
Yeah, it seems to be that Monday's sort of fallen into two different groups. And I wonder if there are some more subgroups. Group one is the business models. So in the various different things, because we talk about virtual events, and we talk about productions, and we talk about many different businesses, each of which have their own business models. So I think sometimes we talk about the business models. Second thing is we talk about the business of running the business, which is how do we get the best out of our people? How do we get the best out of our resources? How do we get the best out of our assets? And I think both of those exist. Now, I don't know if there are other sort of sub-elements as well, but those seem to be two very clear different things we do.
Yeah, and even when you say the business of running the people, that's where we had, John Snyder came in and talked some things about like getting the job. I think that job creation and hiring, and then also presenting yourself. Cher Jones came on and spoke about the branding, but it was more around the person than the branding, that marketplace type of branding. So you're right. We do have a lot of subgroups there. And what other groups are in that space that we can dive into? As I shared, like, let me see if this will pop up. And it is, let's see. Oh, give me 1 second. Let me put this on. There we go. Because I've been thinking about this, like just even with us having like the business side there. So we've got the marketing, we've got the people, as you shared, we've got the innovation, and then there's also, I guess tech could be underneath the innovation side. But what other? Sky, you talk so much about story, and I think about that that a lot as well. Mondays, is that something we can put on a Monday, or what elements? We had a producer series, or I think we spoke about producers' roles at one point. Is that something we should bring back?
Well, you called me out, and so I'm sitting here trying to find the better question, because I figure if you get the right question, you're going to get closer to the right answer. And so I'm sitting here desperately trying to be very concise and respectful of everybody's time about what Seth Godin talks about in solving problems. And he says, solving a problem puts value in the creation first. But first is, who's it for? And I want to get it right. What problem does it solve? And here's the painful part. Would we miss it if it didn't exist? And so in mulling over this conversation is the why are we doing this to begin with, and then work backwards from the need. So this is the story, and I wasn't very succinct. And that's why I was trying to be. Sorry.
He's going around that house trying to find that front door. Yeah, the thing that I guess is important is that a lot of times people understanding the business end of it tend to be more successful than the people that are just good at doing it. And that's always the challenge and I think that's where we want to be using Mondays to make sure that we have all the tools we need to be successful, because all the other days are dedicated to how to do it. Like, these are operational, like this is what it takes to do these things, but we need to back up and go, to Sky's point, we need to back up and go, okay, why are we doing it? Who are we serving? How do we make sure that they know that we do this? How do we, I think that it's really interesting in other conversations that I'm in talking to creators and the amount of attention. And we saw this with the YouTube creators that came on of understanding how the algorithm works and understanding what the process is and understanding what the rules are and understanding what's the pattern. And I think that Keely did that a lot last week talking about Discord and understanding, but we have to understand these mechanisms that are part of our marketing. And a lot of us tend to lean towards, I don't like to market. I just want to do my thing. But if we don't pay attention to those things, we have like I have a good example of, I had a company that went under, and one of the big reasons for that was we were so busy I didn't advertise at all. I was like, I can't take on any work. What I didn't realize is that I could have, it would have allowed me to diversify my clientele and also diversify and pick my clients more effectively and with the same impact that I had there. And those are the kind of business decisions that you want to make. And that's where I think Monday is a place for us to brainstorm on those business decisions. So we're thinking through those in a smart way, because even when we're busy, we may be setting ourselves up for, being top heavy or being exposed in some way that we, and, a lot of us don't know how to bank. We don't know how, there's a lot of things we could be talking about, don't know the best way to structure our loans, the best way to build those things. And those are the kind of things that I think that we could cover here as well.
So I heard from you is also the creator aspect, like the business of the creation, and putting those words together actually is helpful. Like you said, bringing the Keely on, Sean and Benji came on and showed us how, as creators, how they're running their business and how that impacts them as well. So those are some great points. Nigel?
Yeah, I think there are lots of things that if you're running a business are good to know. I think of, the business canvas. I think of building value propositions. I think all of those things. My experiences of this community is that it doesn't necessarily get excited by those things. It gets excited by people who do things or technology that does things and then thinking about how to apply those to themselves. And so some of the challenge, I think, for Monday is that dichotomy between, you've got to know how to build a house before you build a house, but it's much more interesting talking to people who build houses than learning how to lay bricks.
So that also sounds like bringing on more people who are doing the things, because that's the interesting part. So if we're going to teach these really important principles, that not just the discussion around it, but hearing from the people who are doing the thing and how they're doing it, and that being of more interest is what I'm hearing from you, Nigel. Bill?
Yeah, for me, I started understanding that there was a split between the way people look at business operations when I was in radio in my early days, because I as I became the production director of a big radio station, they used to talk about the suits being the sales teams and the administration, and the creatives being the people who were on air or doing production or writing script copy or something like that. And it was interesting to me that those were two separate camps. And I always, after I came out of that, thought they really need to be balanced. Each side maybe has a little bit of, it's those guys about the other side, but unless you're doing both, and most people, and this was the kind of wake up for me, most people naturally sort themselves into one or the other camp. You don't see as many people who are happy to deal with the ratings and the metrics and the books, and also be the person sitting down with a blank piece of paper and writing a really compelling radio spot. Sometimes you do, and some people have those brains and switch back and forth. And I just always felt like it was important to understand, A, where I fit and what my primary goals were. B, to respect what the other side did, because I can't do that. And they have their own talents in that area. And C, knowing that if I was going to be entrepreneurial and I was going to go out, I had to switch back and forth, and I had to not ignore either side. And that's very difficult as you're trying to get a bootstrap business off the ground, to pull yourself out of the creative and do the books or do the marketing or do something that you are not naturally desirous of spending your time doing, but without which you are really limiting your possibilities for success.
Thanks, Bill. John?
I'm in the shower. That's where all my thoughts come to me. And I'm considering this word creator and then juxtaposing that against what Midjourney's doing. I can't remember what Alex calls them. Diffusionist, artist, or something.
Diffusionist. We've decided we're I heard last night. I was listening to the MIT an MIT article, and they're calling it a prompt engineer. But I think
prompt engineer.
But I think diffusionist is better.
So think about these new AI tools and how good Midjourney is and ChatGPT, and how easy it's going to be to create content moving forward, and how that crosses over humanity. So it's going to be an interesting battle moving forward.
Sky?
Well, I'm also helping us delineate the difference between passion, a passion project, a hobby, and the difference between what is a service and what is a product. And these are things, and I really feel what Bill's talking about here, being a one-person creator and business means time. So I'm also thinking the work-life balance is a part of our conversation here, because Guy is very creative, but he's in charge of a lot of humans underneath him. But he's brought in people that are very good at helping him with the business and the human side. And so he's found a way to balance things. So maybe we pick each other's brains on, well, this is how I built something, and you can reverse engineer it from their experience.
I'm glad that you pointed that out, Guy, because I was going to bring him into the conversation as well. Because Sky, you said starting with the end in mind and thinking of the demographics of our community, thinking of who shows up on Mondays, even though there's the replay. So I always get messages from folks who say, oh, I watched the replay and what value it brought to them. But then looking at the connection with, okay, well, Guy and building his business, his story, and speaking to a Guy, like what other tools or resources would someone like Guy, or maybe Guy 5-10 years ago, because we've had a lot of conversation about people who are moving from freelance or working and then becoming a freelancer. And like Noah always gives great suggestions on topics too, because he's in transition. Like, is that what our community looks like, and what tools and resources they need? And Guy, like, even if you could speak to that, of just look at you 5 years ago and the things that have helped you. You've mentioned community and meeting with other entrepreneurs or the SBA, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just kind of going off of memory of things that have helped.
Yeah, definitely. When I started out, it was one of those things where I wanted to just focus on the creative. I wanted to shoot videos, do videos. I wanted to do these tech reviews, and I was having fun doing it because I would get a call. And the moment that I realized that I don't have to just talk one-to-one on a call, I can make a video and that'll go to 1,000 people. It was that big leverage piece. But what I despised doing was the books on the weekend, and I'd have to come in and catch up with all this monotony stuff. And so there's the right brain and the left brain. And it's torture to creatives to sit there and excel and sit there and, do monotonous robot work, where other people just love it. They're just like, hey, how can I show up? How can I help the team? And so as you build, you really need to have both sides. In fact, we had a specialist that came in at one point from our college class, and he ran all these assessments on all the staff. And he's like, wow, you're way off balance. So you really want a balanced company. You don't just want a bunch of people that'll, quote, charge and take the hill. So you have these drivers, these people that just want to drive and get things done. But then you have these other people that are like, slow down. We need to dot the I's, cross the T's. You make sure that all the logistics are in place. You don't want to show up and not have, all the resources you need to take the hill. So you really need a balance. And so a lot of this stuff is just patience. So a lot of people think that this is going to happen fast. I mean, I'm going on year 19. This has been a long haul. And so building up the team to, at one point I had 35 employees. I have 17 right now. So people come and go. We've done manufacturing. We were e-tailer, and we've kind of just gone with the flow. And what excites me about what we're doing is all this digital first, and trying to figure out, is there just a new business model with Zoom and with virtual events that we're not seeing, because shipping physical goods, bringing them in from China when stuff's, we got these port things that have slowed us down. And so it's just a different world that we're living in now. So we're trying to pivot. And that's what I enjoy about meeting with this group, is there's a lot of sharp minds, and people are saying, this is the future. And so is it ChatGPT? Is it AI? Is it AWS? So I'm here just having fun, coming up to the mound and taking swings, because there's something here for sure. I love doing the shows and going to the NABs and the Cinegears and seeing what's out there, and hopefully CES tomorrow if I can make it.
Nice. And then Ronnie in the chat shared Monday they are thinking less theory, more hands-on and real experience. So thank you for that comment. Mark?
So I think a lot of what Guy said is true. Sometimes you have to be able to know what you're good at and what other people might be better at. And so it's part of it is being a team. Another part of it is know when it takes you 3 left turns and somebody else just makes a right turn, maybe they're better at what they're doing than you are. So you have to learn how to delegate and grow the business. It's really hard to do at first because usually it's a one-person shop, but as you grow bigger, you have to learn to delegate because there's just not enough hours in the day to do everything.
Courtney?
Yeah, a guy mentioned something is you got to learn how to pivot too, because a market that you started out to pursue, may not materialize, or it may be just a flash in the pan fad or something. And so you have to learn how to take your business and pivot your strong points and your strong areas of interest to maybe doing something else. And you got to look at all the opportunities and branches out there so that you may want to turn in a different direction to stay successful.
And speaking of, and Mark, I'm happy that you shared that as well, because there are also people who are in business and or corporate. So they're not necessarily building, but what about the people who are trying to maybe grow within that space and what that looks like, or what some of those tools look like? I think it might have been Deborah sometime back had made a comment on a show of wanting to know more about working with vendors, but from the perspective of someone who's in an organization and how, so our community that provides services for a lot of people, some things that can help her better or people like her in those organizations. And I would love for a couple minutes before we go to the questions to even hear for those who on the panel who, if you remember your corporate years or your nonprofit years, what are some of those topics or subject matters that we might be able to bring into the community to help? Because everyone does not have their own business, is not a freelancer, but it's still under the umbrella of business. Like Nigel had shared, the people business, the managing relationship business. And I'm throwing out keywords so that when we listen back to the show, that we can have those documented and those notes so that it'll help us plan the next quarter of shows. Alex?
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of subjects we could talk about as far as navigating organizations that would probably be useful. They're hard to talk about sometimes, but I think that they're necessary. A lot of people feel like, oh, well, I don't want to play the corporate game, or I don't want to do this or whatever. But if you don't go very far. So you need to understand like what are the rules of this field, and how do people expect to be part of that. And I think a lot of times, again, as artists, a lot of people tend to want to ignore that. But they're pretty key, whether it's, and they're all different, they're different protocols in different organizations.
Bill?
Yeah, a lot of times people say, I want to do this, and they start doing it, and they haven't done any of that kind of background work. I think there are things, particularly licenses, regulations, things like that, that may or may not be involved in the area where you are going to start your small business and start doing something for money. But they do exist. One of the wisest things I did was stumble into a small business administration class in the early days. Now, I had to take what was useful out of that class and throw away a lot of stuff that wasn't. They were building businesses on the classic model of, get an attorney, get a CPA, do all this stuff the formal way, which is good for businesses that have a lot of funding behind them. But if you're just an entrepreneur type and you're starting out, maybe hiring a lawyer is not the first thing you want to do, because you've got to get some income rolling through your system. But understanding some of the structural pieces that make you a business in the eyes of the business community. If you don't understand any of that, it's really easy to find yourself in a circumstance where you've misprepared. You've got something rolling and suddenly you think, oh, I could get this big gig if I just land it. And somebody asks you for a P&L statement or something else, and you haven't done any of that stuff. And you're totally unready to move to the next level because you just haven't dotted your I's, crossed your T's, and looked at the business as a business.
You just give me an idea there, Bill, of just like even going back to the comment of less theory. Well, if there is, a guest who walks through their experience with sales or P&Ls or just that component, but then we can tie a lab into that where the hands-on aspect of it that can really help people and walk them through that, in after hours, just pairing the two together to make what we do here, make that even more practical and hands-on for the community. Because again, we're serving and helping people to grow. Sky?
And as I ended up in Los Angeles, and I was again taught by a very sage producer, and he says, no, this is a factory town. We're cranking out video sausages, and it's called the entertainment business. And so if you think you're going to join the circus and go off and just have a fun time, well, somebody has to tend to the elephant.
All right, so let's get into these questions. And again, producers, this is your opportunity to put even some of your thoughts or some of the things based on what we've spoken about our second hours on Mondays and what you would like to see. And if there's something that we haven't touched on, throw that out there. Let's see where we can go with it. Go ahead, Bill.
Juan C. Robles has our first one from Mexico City, Mexico. And he says, how about when things don't go as planned? How do you manage and or prepare to close a business?
Bill.
Well, in part, that depends on how formally you have created things. A lot of people take flyers and they try to do small business stuff, and unwrapping those, if you haven't done a lot of structural building behind the business, it can be relatively easy. Look out for the little gotchas, like maybe you realize you had to do sales taxes, so you signed up for that. And if you don't detangle yourself from those kind of formal relationships, you can end up getting mail for 5 years saying, where are your quarterly reports? And you just never really paid any attention to that stuff. So, as you do things, as you sign up for things, as you get licenses, as you do that, make sure you do that. It was really interesting. I was looking online, and one of my feeds is related to like the history of the Beatles. And somebody posted the other day the last formal document that dissolved that corporation. I mean, here was a huge, massive success. And the last one was from John Lennon, and it was the actual letter that he had to sign to dissolve his portion, to agree to dissolve the corporation that was the Beatles. I mean, we think of them as just mop-top musicians, but they were on top of a massive enterprise, and they had all sorts of documentation, and it was highly structured. And until the fourth partner in this thing signed that official letter, it was an entity that was still alive. And only in that last fourth signature did it not become what it was and really stop operating. So it just woke me up to the fact that even the most creative businesses are still businesses at heart, and you have to follow the rules or things don't go right.
Nigel?
Yeah, I think Bill's right. And I think people underestimate the amount of costs that come with their business and the costs of being in business. So typically, if a majority of startups fail. So that's just a fact of life. And what kills most of us, and I've been in those that have failed, is they run out of cash. So cash burn and understanding what you're spending is really the most important thing you can do. The other mistake people make is they assume that shutting their business has no costs. And in fact, shutting your business is going to have a significant cost. Depending on the nature and the structure of that business, it may be significant costs. And sadly, you really should know the cost of shutting your business down, because you need to make sure you shut it down before you run out of cash, because you need to know how much cash to do that. And while it's a depressing subject, if done properly, it gives you a sense of actually what your assets are and what your liabilities are. And that's important to know when you run any business.
Sky?
I actually have a company called Embrace the Journey, and it is a passion project, but I have to have the legal issues making a film. So consequently, it is embracing the spontaneous things that might not go the way you were expecting. So that's an attitude, but at the same time, I have also had another company with another producer that we set mile markers that if our business doesn't achieve, as Nigel's point, a cash influx at a certain point, it doesn't make logical sense to support our families. And so we created mile markers by which we both, unfortunately, it was just the two of us, and we had very minimal expenses and very minimal investments. So we were able to divide that as evenly as possible financially at the end. And we're still friends, and we get Christmas cards to each other.
Great question. I'm taking this based on us doing a brainstorm. So more so looking at it as, oh, this would actually be a great series and or a number of sessions that we do talking about. I've shared this a lot, that in the past I've gone through Techstars Pre-Accelerator, and that was getting your business idea, your pitch, your deck, and all of that together to go for funding and to speak to investors. Well, one of the things they shared with us, and they say constantly, is, well, what are you setting this up for? Are you setting this up for an exit? And that's what I kind of read from here is, okay, setting a session that would talk about dissolving a business and all the elements and the steps that you need to consider, and having even some professionals who can speak to that area. So Juan, please let me know if I'm hitting the mark of what you were thinking with this question, because that, again, would be a great series of like how to dissolve a business. They say that, I don't have the percent in front of me of the number of small businesses or businesses that actually fail. So we can help the community that, okay, as optimistic as we want to be, but if something goes south, here are the steps, here's the checklist, here are the people you need to speak with to help you through that process. So that could be a great series and of tremendous value. Courtney?
And talk to your tax accountant, because a lot of times a failing business can offer you, if you have other sources of income, that failing business can become a good source of write-offs to your income, so that failing businesses can be of value tax-wise to you. So talk to your tax accountant. As many multi-billionaires know, that a failing business can help them avoid paying lots of taxes like they normally do.
Yeah, and even taxes. Thank you, Courtney. All of these are like markers, chapter markers for the notes of like even taxes, and our community is global. So even maybe some more conversations around business from an international perspective, or maybe there are some regions where John might have the data on this of like where businesses happen and where creators, or where we're seeing some emerging markets, and what we need to know about those areas that could be helpful. Next question.
Eric Billings in Washington, D.C. is up next. And Eric says, how about a session on app building? Perhaps a call to action for needed apps that you don't have the time to build yourself, or tips and tricks like contacts or contracts, business arrangements, LLCs, and so forth, or IP, intellectual property protection.
I can definitely see a session on that. And knowing that there is, I always find it so interesting when people answer questions and then like, Alex is always saying this, I built this, I built that. It's like, yeah, having more conversations around that. Alex?
Yeah, I think that you could break all of those up. So having, I think someone talking about copyright, even someone, I think bringing someone in to talk about patents, someone to talk about, the basic business structures, like what's the difference between a C Corp, S Corp, LLC, all those things, so people understand like why would you do one or the other, and have someone who builds those up. And there's, for instance, I've worked with some folks on provisional patents. People don't know that a lot of people don't, I didn't know that those existed. Like, that can be a inexpensive way to kind of lay a stake, And so those are the kind of things that I think bringing that lawyer on to talk about, like how do patents get structured and how do they look, in that process. I think those kinds of things could be a really interesting, conversation in that area.
Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, when business relationships go awry in some ways, especially for personal or familial reasons, but people still have to work together, how do you go about rebuilding these relationships so that they can be the best possible in those circumstances?
Go ahead, David.
Well, I've been through a few of those in my career, and the way that I find that works best for me is to own up to things that you have influence over. So if it's something that you've done or said, just own up to it. Address it as soon as possible, and then it's in the past from there, and just worry about the current day-to-day kind of thing. I also try to live that good work-life balance and leave the work stuff at work and keep my home stuff separate from that. That's my best advice.
Boundaries. I like that. That's a good one that we could do a whole show on that too. Bill?
Yeah, this is a tough one because you're dealing with human emotions here, and this idea of somebody in that grouping going, "This would have worked if you hadn't failed in whatever." That inability of us as all humans, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, to fail in the area of forgiveness has always struck me as one of the things that makes this particularly difficult. And, it's a double-edged sword because when you're trying to grow something from the ground up, the people who will most know you and help you out are your closer relations, whether it's family or friends or, dorm mates or whatever. These are the only people who have enough knowledge of what you're capable of to support you in trying to build something. And when it goes wrong, it's these same people that you had a closeness with that you find on the outside. And we've all seen the movies of all of these, the Facebook story and things like that, where at some point, somebody who was really there in the seminal moments of the business and worked really hard gets pushed out of it. And it makes everybody emotionally resonate with, how could you do that to him or her? They really, if they hadn't been there, would you have really achieved your success? And then the other side of that is maybe for that business, that person just wasn't growing to the right level. And it's just very difficult. And so forgiveness is a tough thing to master. If you can, I do believe that it makes your life massively better in the long run. But boy, it's hard.
Go ahead, Sky.
Keeping with this theme of this show, of the brainstorming, I'm listening to the keywords. As you pointed out, Liberty. And what I'm hearing here that could potentially be for other shows is personality, managing expectations, and creating those. And the other keyword I'm seeing in here is relationship. And whether I'm blood related or wanting to, like I said, with my previous business partner, still send Christmas cards to each other. So those were keywords that I was pulling out for future shows of. Even HR, that sounds much bigger, but I'm sure Guy has to deal with both humans on many levels that he still wants to have friends with.
Agreed that. So yes, the human resources, I heard that too. Courtney?
Yeah, the more successful a business is and the more number of partners it is, the more problems you're going to have with relationships between the individual partners, because each one will think that they're more responsible for the success of the business, or they want to take the business in a different direction, or have advice on how to divide the spoils of the business. And I think the best way to deal with that, you're always going to enter into divisive arguments. And if it's families, that's a big problem. And the best way is to deal with that is like a marriage counselor. You find a third-party arbiter to arbitrate the problems that come up in the business, and you both agree, all the partners agree to on a third-party arbiter that's disinterested, doesn't own any part of the business, and can help make decisions and sort out problems between the different partners. And I find that's a good way to deal with it, kind of like a marriage counselor.
And keywords that I heard, and I'm also making notes in the chat as well, is like just the relationship part of it, the relationship building, relationship management. I remember Googling for a talk that I had to give, and just the conflict resolution, the amount of times that came up in search. So just some of those things, like if we had experts that came in and shared, whether that be in, small business, small teams, bringing it a little bit broader. So in teams, conflict resolution, I think we had something along those lines as well. But then, corporate. So that's what I heard as something that could be a second hour on that topic. Mark?
So I think we should have a second hour on team building, because most of these business relationships involve people's personalities. Some people have personalities that are stronger than others and they want to take over. And, one way to work around that is by having someone come in to talk about team building. When we do these large federal contracts, it's built into the contract where every quarter we sit down and the whole group gets together, the contractors, the designers, and we hash it out with professional team builders.
Alex?
And I even think, about the mundane things of running meetings. I don't know if we've done a second hour on prepping for meetings and running meetings that matter. But I think that's important. And, there's a lot of different permutations of that, but I think running meetings effectively and how to be in a meeting as well, I think would be a great second hour subject.
Next question.
Alexander Knight, Vancouver, British Columbia, says, when trying to build a business as a side hustle slowly, a discussion about how to divvy up profits into the correct areas, how much to invest in new gear versus your rainy day fund versus savings and so forth.
Alex?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of subjects here, whether, how to structure loans, how to, invest, how to build a rainy day fund, how to, there's lots of things that we could be talking about in those structures, and I think each one of them is probably a good one to build. Yeah, the ratios that you want to build around, and what you want to think about as a freelancer, because what you want to think about as a freelancer is different than what you want to think about as a corporate entity. And when do you spend that money and how do you spend it? There's always this. I think there's a lot of things that we could bring some experts in to talk about related to managing that burn rate, as was talked about before.
And then even I like how Alexander put it, as well as the side hustle. So I'm thinking about a combination of one of the topics or questions in the first hour was when you're sitting at your desk and stretching. So just the health aspect, the mental health side of, you have like just that alone, we could break mental health up into a series as well. But having a main, like your full-time job, but then the side hustle and the things productivity wise, or what will help you to be able to grow or sustain. Some people want that side business to just be that extra cash and slush fund or legacy building. Some people want to eventually switch it so that side hustle becomes the main thing, and just a series of conversations around how to get there and the things that need to happen in order to do that. Nigel?
Yeah, I was just going to follow on from the point you made. I see a lot of people try and turn fun things into businesses. And I think it'd be worth an interesting conversation is, what is the difference between doing something as a hobby and doing it as a business? And what are the costs, both financial, social, family-wise? What are the implications of that? Because that's a thing that catches lots of people out.
And even, I like that you said even just the term hobby, of your hobby making money, but it's still being a hobby, because for some people there's a switch when it's not fun anymore because of all the business related things that happen. So maybe there's something there to help that you can still make some money, but how to keep it fun, again, under the mental health or the life harmony aspect of it. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas asks how to balance when to pivot or change quickly, as Courtney said, with when to stay with what works.
Sky?
Well, Alex, you've actually been in the same room as Richard Branson, and I'm sure you know some VCs there. And I've heard about, fail forward, fail fast in that part of the world with regards to money. So I'd love to hear some of their stories of how they've failed forward, failed fast, and if as an attitude. So to hear stories from people that have done that, that'd be a great second hour.
Alex?
Yeah, and I think that thinking about business models in general, because I think that there is I think that talking about fail forward, fail fast, but also there's a slow burn opportunities too. There's people who have decided to take a slower, they're not taking all that money up front. They're managing that process, and they're not trying to turn over something in 3 months or a year, but taking years to kind of let it mature. And I think that talking about different kinds of business models and how they might make sense could also be part of that.
And that triggered something of just even mindsets that might sound fluffy for some people, but a lot of the programs and communities that I was in last year and taking that into this year, mindset was a big thing. So maybe there's some layers underneath there, just how you think and processing and decision making. Those are all elements that we may take for granted, but there's a system and a strategy even in doing that and doing that effectively. So that being something of a topic as well. Bill?
And when do you look for outside people, particularly things like investors? Are there signs that you're actually ready to go out into the market and try to build your business by assembling a stronger team outside of you? I know a lot of people imagine that they want to do that, but I think it'd be fascinating to talk about at what point is the right point to try to get to that next step, and what are the warning signs that you're not ready to do that? And if you go out into the marketplace and get investors, you have a bigger chance of failing than succeeding.
Next question.
Next question comes from Ronci Robles from Mexico City. How to improve business operations?
Yes. The short answer is yes, improving business operations. That sounds even along the lines of productivity and tools and the comment about pivoting, because some people there's pivoting and what's what's that switch? What changed that helped you to figure out how to run your business more smoothly, systems, and what systems are necessary. So there's definitely a lot there. Alex?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of there could be productivity tools that a lot of us use. So just kind of a breakdown of what those kind of tools are. I think also inviting some of the folks in, like Miro is a good example of a kind of a whiteboarding app that I didn't know existed, and then I was working on a software development with a company that uses it very effectively. And I was like, well, that's pretty good. And Zoom has a lot of its own tools that are going down this path as well, and they're partnering with other folks. And then you have Apple's, and so I think there's a lot of things that are happening in that space of how do we collaborate, how do we design things, and then again from the business end, even how do we manage our books? It's probably a pretty useful one. And talking through that, we've answered those questions, but I think that there are techniques like there's a lot of accrual versus cash, all those things. I think a lot of folks don't know what that means, and I think that they should. If they're going to start a business, they need to know what that means.
Bill?
I just wanted to add a +1 on this. I'll never forget, as I got working with higher and higher ups in larger and larger corporations, the single biggest word of praise that I heard from a CEO or corporation president towards somebody coming up in the organization was they're an excellent operator. They look for that ability to see systems, run systems, move people into the right places. On all size businesses, as you're growing, this becomes more and more critical the higher and bigger you go.
You made a great point there, Bill, with the operator. That, again, one of those communities that I'm in, someone was saying, I'm looking for an operator. I am the creative person, and I need someone who's just going to look at the business and the implementation that goes into that, which makes me think of even a second hour of helping to define roles, maybe some fundamental roles that a business should have, and just going through and talking through those, describing them, case studies. I'm spitballing here, but just that so that people know what's possible, because businesses have evolved and operations has evolved, and really understanding the nuts and bolts of what that could look like. That could be like a business 101, but not focusing just on the typical things we do. But no, this is the spectrum of what a healthy business should look like, and who you need at this level, the mid-level, and, getting ready to exit level, what those roles could look like. Alex?
Yeah, that had me thinking about, just like how to build a team, like where do you find them? Like that's a whole, business in it. I mean, a whole second hour is how do you find people to hire for a specific job? Like I have a gig that I need to hire people for. How do we find people for that? So what are people using Production Hub, or are they using other things? And then how do you build, a workforce, which is different. Guy touched on that before, which is like, how do you decide who goes where and the type of people that you're looking for? But how do you even reach out, and do you use advertising, or do you put things on it? Or, the most complex version for me is I build communities. It's like that's what I do to find people. And so it can have a lot of different ways of doing that.
Sky?
I'm getting giddy about this next quarter now. I'm going to be learning a lot, because that Alex commented about long-term versus short-term. Both have a value, both have a need. but to help us understand and delineate those and go through some exercises of when is, what the solution the best for use case. Also, the phrase that I've heard before is people are often looking for the silver bullet. What is really needed is the silver buckshot. And so that's similar in resources. So I'm looking, how do we define those and those conversations? I mean, that information.
Mark?
So along with the business operations and improving them, one good guest to have on would be a lawyer that understands interstate commerce, because like our A&E company has 23 different states that we are registered to design in, but we also have to register with those states as foreign corporations. We have to know how to set up in those states, because we are a Virginia corporation that's a general corporation, because it was the only way that the other states would accept us. So if not all states will accept designing personal or professional corporations. So it gets very complicated. And you also, as Alex said, the difference between cash and accrual gets very complex on jobs where you're getting paid way out. So we could have a guest come in as an accountant and explain to us, how do you file these taxes in different states? Are you on a cash basis? Are you on an accrual basis? What's the IRS going to determine? So there's lots of complicated issues that we could have professionals come in and talk to us about.
Yeah, sounds good. Nigel?
It sort of bounced off this was client service, customer service. How do you communicate with your clients? What's the best way to do it? I think people underestimate the need for many clients to have good communication, whether it's white glove or whatever it is. If you're a service business, that's the product you're shipping often, and that's underestimated.
I think, what came to me as we were talking too is like even case studies and how to actually build a case study. And someone else had shared two case studies, and I might have lost the other one, but that being something that would be helpful. Guy?
Yeah, I'd love to see a second hour on just business resources. I think a lot of people don't think about what you don't know can hurt you. It can even kill you. So having these people that have gone up the mountains like Sherpas, people that can say, I breathed the air up there at the $50 million mark, and here's what it smells like. You need to go back down to base camp and get more acclimated to the air because you're going to go up a big hill. So bring in some resources that have been there. Maybe a business coach could come in. I've used a lot of different mastermind type groups. And so bring in those types, something to think about. Just people have smelled the air up there doing the kind of big productions. I know we've had Ricardo Hicks is a gentleman that's been pretty heavy into our show, and he runs a pretty tight ship. And so seeing some of the stuff that he posts up on Facebook and LinkedIn, I'm really, really proud to see his business grow. And so getting people like that are resourceful and that have smelled the air or been burned, so they could share some of those arrows in the back that we don't want to take ourselves.
Right. And thank you, Guy. You just helped me with that. It was analytics, that other one being analytics. And I think I saw in the chat, Adam had even mentioned like failing forward, even if there was a show or something, just really digging into failure and the lessons and learnings that come from that. Next question.
Ronny Hofsey in Tromsø, Norway, up next with how to position and market virtual production in the marketplace. Many clients do not understand the change from physical to digital, and especially how quickly it happens. Maybe we could make some promo videos?
Nigel.
Yeah, I don't want to answer the question. I'm much more interested in how do you make the case? So how do you build a convincing storyline? So what I find often with people who are very good at content and are very professional at what they do is actually fairly poor at convincing other people who don't get it what needs to be got. So I think it would be useful to do a session on how do you build a case? How do you convince somebody of something that's important to you, which might not be important to them? You can't necessarily make it important, but you can communicate it better.
Sky?
I was once told by a client, your product that you gave us, your content was awesome. It's just not what we need, because we missed the mark on who the audience was. So what I'm hearing in here is how do we learn to listen? And so I don't know if there's how to do a class on that, of asking better questions, Nigel, of who's our client? What do we want them to do?
Research. That could be something of like researching well, tips and hacks, and as you shared too, of like the audience side, like there's a whole division of like user experience and what it goes into understanding your demographic. So that's awesome. Sky, thank you for that. Bill?
Yeah, I remember at one point hearing the phrase qualifying a customer, and I didn't know what it meant at the time. I learned it later, that how not to waste your time on things. So I think some of those terms, a show on some of those terms that people may not be familiar with, that lead to a little more discussion about why you should maybe say yes to one client and no to another client, could be really useful for people who are building businesses.
Awesome. Next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. Resources for people with disabilities and those that are neurodivergent, autism spectrum, and so forth, in building their careers and starting their own businesses.
A hard yes. That is definitely. I remember there was a show we had a couple weeks ago, and Laura and in the back end typed in the chat so that we could then communicate, oh, this is where you can hire people. So I think that would, again, because of our community, would be a great service for people in our community who are enabled, special enabled, but then also for those who are looking to either vendors or hiring, and just figuring out some of those resources. So yes, thank you for that, Douglas. Next question.
Juan C. Robles from Mexico City, back again with, how about recruiting personnel and or clients through improving a business's public image?
Sky?
Well, and that we are an international organization, and that we've got those challenges that Nigel pointed out. We don't have just our local talent that we're dealing with. So consequently, I would love information about his question, but on a global scale.
Agreed. Bill?
And I think it would be an interesting show to talk about marketing in terms of all of its subgroupings, including advertising and public relations. I mean, you're talking about basically something has to do with the company's public relations. And I don't think people have a clear understanding always of how those things are different and what the different impact of earned media and paid media and things like that. And I think that's worth probably a full show worth of discussion.
And Sky?
Well, and also understanding the different cultures that you're working inside of, and whether it's age or language or gender, whatever the cultures are. So there's something to do in that conversation.
Agreed. Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. Topic area: when to hire and best practices for hiring the right person.
Nigel?
Yeah, I just want to add that along with hiring comes retaining. I think there's a generational shift going on, and what the next generation want may be different. How do we understand that? And then you will top and tail that with the unpleasant thing of how do you successfully fire somebody?
Next question.
Harshid Trivedi, Daytona Beach, Florida, up next here on the panel. Would you want to learn about accessibility, structured or unstructured? Structured is something like the WCAG Guidelines in each of its 4 pillars, or unstructured is like pulling a book off the shelf and talking about it.
That's a great question, Harshid. Alex?
Yeah, I think that bringing folks on that are experts in this area and and having them talk through those things, I think would make sense. Harshid is an expert in that area, so we can probably bring him in to talk about those things. But we can bring a variety of different people from the industry to have these roundtables. I think it's important for us to cover.
Yes, Harshid, we need to get you on the roster. Harshid?
Yeah, so I think that is true, that we need to maybe get in more specialists in the field. Someone like Shelby that also does radio hits and whatnot and talks about accessibility, but it's how do we want to learn it? Because accessibility, as I learned last Friday, it's huge. It's the WCAG guidelines are so vast, but so short. It's only 13 of them, but how do we really dive into them in each section? So it makes me want to think that if we get some experts to come in and talk about specific topics like the book idea, the Unstructured, I think we might just end up learning more and then figure out what we really need to dive into to pick up the missing pieces.
Thank you, Harshid. Next question.
Next question comes from Deborah Woodfork in Washington, D.C. Professional headshots are a small yet useful thing to have. What are ways to get these done?
Guy?
Actually, we probably could get the master on. Steve Brazel introduced me to Peter Hurley, who wrote the book on headshots, and he has a fabulous group of people. I help sponsor his Zoom 1080p account, so I see how many hundreds of people pop in every day to hear him, and he has a group basically that gets people in every city to create these headshots. He has a special look using Westcott lights that he's perfected. So I would love to get him on, or somebody similar to him, to show how to get these headshots done, because it's some lighting and there's things underneath that you can do to bounce light from underneath that just make things look magical. So I'd love to have a whole second hour on headshots.
Sky?
I was thinking bringing in a portrait photographer, because what they're also doing is seeing the trends and also potentially setting the styles, because they're changing and modifying depending on where you end up putting that on LinkedIn versus Facebook versus.
Oh, and versus.
I was letting it dangle out there. I was letting it was because there's so many places that your face could show up nowadays. So there's places that I don't know. So such as.
Got it. Bill?
Yeah, it would be a fun thing. I've done a good little bit of this myself. I used to go into corporations and do maybe 50 or 100 corporate headshots over the course of 2 or 3 days. And it is a specialist thing, because you're thinking about, do I shoot at everybody on infinity white so that we can knock them out and allow them to be matted over a bit, whatever background they want? Or are we trying to shoot a more candid, soft style and move people around an area? And I've done both. I've taken CEOs around their operations and trying to get both them portrayed as somebody relatable and them portrayed as a business leader. And the approach to those two images are very different. In fact, we've had CEOs who have had to do 3 or 4 costume changes, essentially, over a course of a corporate shoot, just to get that done for one person. And then when you have to also figure out how to do 100 other employees and make them all consistent but useful in those various outputs, it's not a trivial thing. It would be great to have somebody like Steve come in and talk about that.
So I heard the words essentially like executive presence or showing up professionally, or just like some of those, what goes into that. We can, again, break that into a series. Next question.
Next question from Ronnie Hofsey in Tromsø, Norway. How to recruit the new digital workflow.
Workflow, that in and of itself could definitely be something there. Alex?
Yeah, and I think that talking about what that workflow is, but also how do you get people, I think that there's a great subject of how do you get people in your corporate environment or clients to buy into a new workflow. We've had questions about that, and I think a second hour of trying to sell the future as opposed to sitting in the past would be a great one.
Courtney?
Yeah, having a show where you work out the intricacies of whether someone is an employee or an independent contractor, the tax liabilities, the differences between states, having someone who's an expert in HR and dealing with independent contractors and or employees would be excellent too. How to define those lines if you're hiring someone in a virtual digital workflow.
Sky?
Where does AI fit into that question? That's going to be huge.
Great point. And next question. And I think this is our last one, is it?
That comes from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada. Topic idea: different types and or stages of fundraising, angel, venture capitalist, difference between seed rounds and so forth.
This actually goes back to the idea of whether it be the show that we do terms on, or maybe it's a fundraising or investor 101, maybe even a lot of the topics that have come out of today, bringing into that an idea of a 101 session, and where we can take people through the fundamentals and then making sure we bring in the advanced or the next level. Because I think I've heard Alex just saying in the past of, we want to take people through the journey. Mark?
Well, I think it's a great topic. One, have a banker come in and talk about lines of credit, how you have to work on your line of credit, what your collateral is, what are accounts receivable. Some banks don't let them go past 90 days. They just write them off the books. And then talking to somebody about, angel investors and how much are you going to give up of your company if you have investors come in.
Thank you. Sky?
I'm just raising my hands for yes. This is a great topic. And again, somebody mentioned earlier, oftentimes we borrow money from friends. We put too much money on too many credit cards. So this would be a great education right there.
We did it again, the first Monday show of the new year. Thank you so much, producers. Like, I feel great about us going in to bring on the guests and create the speak to the topics that matter most to you so that, again, we can have a successful year. Panelists, thank you so much for your contributions and responding to our questions. And of course, the back end team, without which this would not be possible. And again, this entire week is all brainstorming. So I know that once you leave today, or if you're watching the replay, as you muddle through just thinking over some of these ideas, jot them down, drop them in Discord under the second hours, and please do vote them up, because those subjects, we know that you really want to hear about them. And tomorrow we will be talking about tomorrow's graphics day. So graphics topics including 2D, 3D, render, LiDAR, AI art. So bring your ideas about what you want to hear about that. And it's time to go. We'll see you in after hours. Be sure to visit officehours.global to learn more about the rest of the week. And we'll see you soon. Bye. Awesome show. Thank you, everyone. David, Mark, it was nice to see you on a day sky.
I'm giddy about this first quarter. These topics are awesome. Big holes in my knowledge.
That could be a whole second hour. How to avoid making Sky giddy.
Found the impossible.